Hello and welcome to another edition of
Not trains and trams, not trolley buses and trams, but this time just trains.
Just Trains, but not any old train. What train in particular are we going to be looking at today?
Today we'll be looking at the British Rail Class 71.
Indeed, so yes, my name's Jay and I've got the distinct pleasure and honour to be joined by Charlie, who knows an awful lot about the Class 71, right?
Yes.
Excellent. A lot of research has gone into this, and we hope that after listening, you take a little bit of knowledge away with you, and maybe you'll find out where you could go and see one today, but not yet. What do you want to start with, Charlie?
I think we should start it when they started being in operation.
Okay, and when was that? Give us some stats on the Class 71 locomotive.
So there were 24 built, and the 24 were built by 1958 and put in service the same year. And they had a maximum horsepower of 2,300, unless they were working in just an hour, which they could do 2,552 horsepower.
Whoa, that's a lot of horses. I guess that would produce a pretty fast, train. How fast could it go?
It could average out a top speed of 90 miles an hour.
90? That's fast even by today's standards, but it's not a modern train, is it, this?
No, quite the opposite. These were to try and make trains modern, because they came around just as modernisation began, to try and show off what modern type trains could do.
Right, okay, so very much a pioneer by, sort of going, well, we don't need, it's coming out of the steam era, of course, and we've got lots of diesel engines around, but that's pretty incredible.
They were unfortunately taken out of service in 1977, but before we get to why they were taken out of service, let's go through a few more facts about them.
Yeah, sure. Where do you want to start?
I think since they're electric, we should start with the voltage. So they run off a 750 volt direct current overhead and third rail electric.
Okay, and that third rail electric, you've got to watch for that, haven't you? Because you can't step on that, right?
No, if you're to step on that, you'll be electrocuted with, nowadays, probably still about 750 volts of electricity.
Yeah, disclaimer for all the listeners, it's best avoided.
So, we've gone over the electricity and third rail, which kind of leads on to the next thing, which were their bogies, which is the part that makes them go around corners easier, had electric pickups on the side.
Right.
So that would get the electric off the third rail. But what's more interesting than that is the type of bogie. So the bogies were a bobo, which means they had four wheels on them.
Okay.
So both bogies had four wheels, whereas there were some trains such as a Coco, which had six wheels on each bogie. And then there's mixtures like Boco, which has four at the front and six at the back, and then a Kobo, which has six at the front and four at the back.
I've got you. Okay, so very, very, very cool knowledge there, Charlie. We're looking in this Hornby magazine, or rather I am, and I'm sort of keeping up with all of these stats really, and it says one of the special features on these models is that there's a 5-pole skew wound motor with double flywheel dual bogie drive. I guess that's a pretty cool thing to have on the model, right?
Yeah, for both bogies to be powered is surprisingly rare, because a lot of the time they just make the front bogie powered, and that makes it cheaper and easier for them to build.
Right, I got you. And we should actually, as we've sort of looked at some of the stats, before we go on to the appearance of the train and explain that, Is there anything else you want to talk about on the technical engineering side?
On the engineering side, they weren't 100% electric, and they had small little diesel motors in them in case they ever went anywhere where there wasn't overhead wires or wasn't a third rail. They could run off diesel power until they got to the next place for electricity. But unfortunately, because they weren't designed to be diesel, they didn't have big enough fuel tanks to go long journeys on only diesel.
Okay, so hang on. That sounds not dissimilar to kind of hybrid cars today, right?
Yeah, I suppose, because I'm pretty sure, I don't know much about cars, but hybrid cars are supposed to be mostly electric and only diesel when you run out of electric, right?
Yeah, or they help you get away. So, like, they help you pull away 0 to 25, 30 miles an hour, and then boom, the electric engine kicks in. So it's just to give the car a bit of a boost. I think it's really cool that sometimes we think of this technology as brand new, but actually it was available in the 1950s, which is so cool. Really, really cool to go down, I guess, memory lane in a way. I do recognise these trains, but only from perhaps, watching documentaries, or maybe I've seen one in a museum. Maybe the listeners will find out which museum they could find one in over the summer, perhaps. But what else shall we move on to, Charlie?
I think we should start to move on to when they were being drawn out of service.
Yeah, because that's one of the things. When you're a pioneer of something, you're always it's going to be developed, and there's going to be a progression with things. So when did this happen?
Well, unfortunately, they were only in service 19 years. So by 1977, the last one was taken out of service, except technically it wasn't, because the actual train was still being used, but under a different classification.
And after all, why not? The body of the train, the metal panels and etc. was still okay, right?
Yeah. So the reclassification, when they got made diesel electric, some of them got reclassified as a class 73, which became a brand new purely diesel electric class.
Okay.
But that wasn't really around very long. And then the 73s, even though they were technically the steel train, they don't use the same body style as the original train. Whereas the 74, which is kind of the same train, other than getting rid of the pantograph, the train's almost identical.
I see. And that pantograph would have connected to the electric cables above, right?
Yes.
Excellent stuff. And I have to be honest with all the listeners, I didn't know that. Charlie told me that word earlier, and so Charlie, I can only thank you for educating me on that. I asked about, which line or which operator did they popularly run for, but of course it was nationalised, wasn't it, the rail?
Yeah.
Back then, but it was more perhaps prevalent in certain areas. Is that right?
Yeah. Since they were used a lot of the time for the Golden Arrow, they would have gone from north to south, so they most probably would have operated on the former LMS and the former LNER railways.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And LMS, that's London Midland, is that right?
London, Midland and Scotland.
My goodness me. So yeah, of course, literally from London to Scotland. And LNER?
LNER stands for London and North Eastern Railway.
Excellent stuff. So London all the way up to the North East. And, well, on that note, Charlie, we should reveal, where could you, and you say you have seen it before, but you're a bit young, is that right?
Yes, I've seen it before, but I don't really remember it because I was only about 6 years old.
Okay.
But you can find them, find the last one at the National Railway Museum in Yorkshire.
Excellent stuff. Is that somewhere you would like to visit?
I'd definitely like to revisit because I've been there before, but I only remember the most famous trains, such as when I went there,
Yes.
they
Excuse me.
had a bullet train,
Ooh.
the Mallard, and Stephenson's Rocket there.
That's some lineup, I think. Excellent stuff. So yes, if you can get yourself over to the National Railway Museum in York, we've been looking at lots of images and it looks incredible. But next week, what can we expect to be looking at next week? Excuse me.
I think next week we should do your favourite vehicle from trains, trolley buses and trams, and I'll do a couple of my favourite trains.
Gotcha. I'm going to bring some favourites, maybe one or two, and we actually have one coming up next week, which, well, if I said warship, that might give it away, mightn't it? Might be a little bit of a clue, but that's all we're going to say. It's goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from me.
We'll see you next week. Bye now.
Bye.